Well, good evening, everyone, and greetings from St. Francis Retreat Center here at Mepkin Abbey, and a very warm welcome to all of you who are attending this evening's Forum for Contemplative Ecology with the Reverend Stephen Blackmer. Uh, I was reading this book yesterday called The Afternoon of Christianity by Thomas Halleck, and I came upon this quote that I thought was so appropriate for our theme this evening. He says, "Belief in the Creator is not affirmed by what one thinks about the origins of the world, but how one treats nature." So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sam Keene and let him introduce our presenter tonight.
Thank you, Father Garrick, and welcome to everybody who's joining us from near and far. It's so great to be here for this next Mebkin Abbey Forum for Contemplative Ecology. I'm very blessed to be here at Mebkin Abbey, where we are immersed in a 5-day retreat on contemplative ecology, and many of our retreatants are joining us today. So a special welcome to all of you. And a warm welcome as well to our guest speaker for tonight, who is Reverend Steve Blackmer, who is somebody I have admired for quite a number of years, having gone to the same divinity school. And we're really excited to hear more about his life journey, his ministry, and his message to all of us as we seek to live out this spirit of contemplative ecology. So as a background, Reverend Steve Blackmer is founding executive director of Kairos Earth and chaplain of Church of the Woods. Steve comes to this with 30 years of conservation experience, having founded and built conservation organizations, including the Five Rivers Conservation Trust, the Northern Forest Alliance, and Northern Forest Center. A midlife shift led him to Yale Divinity School and ordination as a priest in the Episcopal Church, carrying the question in his heart and mind: how can being a priest deepen my work to conserve the earth? What does the Christian tradition have to offer to this work? How can the Christian tradition be re-understood and reimagined in a time of need? And how can the conservation movement recover its understanding of the earth as holy ground? So with those powerful questions to all of us, I wanted to extend a very warm welcome to Steve Blackmer.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to see your faces, and I will look forward to learning from all of this group what some of the questions that you may carry are. So I'm going to begin with a little bit more of my own background, just briefly to give you a context for how I come into this. Then talk about my church, Church of the Woods in Canterbury, New Hampshire. I'll leave that, and so just tell you a little bit about what it is, what we do here, and what that may have to say to some of the questions that Sam just expressed, and then lead us into a relatively brief, no more than 10 minutes, guided meditation to invite us each to go into places in our imagination. And then we'll come back out and reflect on those in conversation together. So as Sam said, I am a conservationist and ecologist by original training, work that I began right out of college, not planning to do that, but it's what called me and it stuck. Went to Yale University for to get a degree in forest ecology, and then back to New Hampshire, where I've lived most of my life, and worked in a number of different nonprofit organizations on a variety of mostly forest and mountain conservation issues, primarily in northern New England, but some of them across the country. As I approached my 50th birthday, I had a very powerful experience fasting in the desert wilderness of Southern California. And that experience opened up for me an entirely different way of being in the world. I had grown up with no religious background whatsoever. I had never been to church, grew up in a non-religious family in the Boston area. And somehow coming out of that experience in the wilderness, I found myself pulled toward the church. It remains a great mystery how that happened. 2 years after the experience in the wilderness, a voice spoke to me. A voice, I call it the capital V voice, spoke to me and said, "Priest, you're to be a priest." To this person who had never, and I mean never, not once, attended a church service. I resisted mightily. I lost. And 2 years later, started seminary at Yale Divinity School. Was graduated in 2012, so not very long ago. Returned to New Hampshire and walked on a piece of forest land that I'd been fortunate enough to acquire, about 100 acres of heavily cut over, just been a devastating logging job, this 100 acres, but it was mine now. And the first time I walked on that land as I came back, that voice came back and said, "Start a church." And so I said to the voice, "A church? You mean like a woods church?" "I could do a woods church." "What's a woods church?" And so the story I have to tell here is the fruits of, that was 2012, the fruits of a dozen years of trying to find out, what is a woods church? What does it mean to think about the woods, the land itself, the earth herself, as the sacred space in which we gather? The earth, the land, this piece of woods is my church, where the walls, the walls and the human constructions do not shape the space of prayer and worship, but the land itself does. So I'm going to gently walk us through a little bit of what we do on a Sunday here. The Church of the Woods actually began meeting in September of 2014. So we've actually, this past Sunday, yesterday, was the final Sunday of the 10th year of our being here. So next Sunday, we begin the second decade. At the very beginning, I wondered, what happens if nobody comes? And indeed, there were days when nobody came. And we held a service anyway. I should say, I plus the Woods held a service anyway. The part of what this was about for me was being faithful to that call and not necessarily requiring other human beings to be present. But yesterday we had 35 people gathered in the woods, so the community has grown. So I'm going to invite you first to come into the woods with me, and then I'll describe a little bit, kind of some of the characteristics of what we do here, and then lead you in this little imaginal meditation. So I invite you to imagine gathering well into the forest. You've driven up a long dirt road, pulled into a little park area in the woods. There's a small barn to one side. The sky is open overhead. The woods surround you on all sides. I gather us together and call us to process together into the woods. As we walk down an old logging road, now converted into a pleasant green mossy path, you'll probably find your nostrils overwhelmed by the scent of mushrooms, this extraordinary, earthy, pungent, deep into your nostrils, this smell of mushrooms, of fecund decay, of fertility, of last year's leaves rotting on the ground, just in time for this year's leaves to fall again next month. I'll lead you past a decayed beech tree, so riddled with holes from a pileated woodpecker that it's a miracle it still stands. Past towering white pines and red oaks, past ferns browning and falling back into the earth, past new acorns just shed, past little seedlings and low bush, and then some high bush blueberries, all the berries picked clean by the birds. We'll climb up a little knoll into a clearing among these small hemlock trees, where there are about 20 stumps placed, trees that have offered themselves to be seats for us in the woods. I'll invite you to sit down on one of the stumps and simply recognize that this sacred space we are gathered in is not limited to human beings. The congregation that is assembled here is not only human beings, but is all of these creatures, the trees and the birds, the dragonflies, the sun, the rocks, the soil, the mushrooms decaying, the pine cones that have fallen, the lady slippers that have gone by. Every single piece of the creation that is here is part of the congregation. So no matter how many human beings are here, we have the fullness of this extraordinary cross-section of the world's beauty. So I'll invite you into a time of silence. Today we'll skip that a little bit to keep this on time, but usually 2 or 3 minutes, we just gather in silence and just sit there in the presence of all of these beings, and of course infused by the divine within and around, filling everything. And then we might sing, and we'd greet one another, introduce one another, read from scripture and other sources. And then I would offer a little teaching. So the little teaching here today, I'm going to talk about the 4 C's that shape this community, this congregation, this sharing. The first is the congregation itself, as I said, which is not limited to human beings, but is encompassing of all creatures who are here, living and non-living, coming and going. Everything that is present shapes the congregation. Then secondly, we have a time at the close of a brief homily. We have a time of contemplation built into the center of the service, where I invite everyone to go into the woods on their own for 20 minutes, simply to be in the presence of the woods and one another. So what I'm going to do as we do that, this is the second part, this contemplative part built right into the center. I'm going to lead you on this little meditation. So I invite you to sit upright. Place your feet squarely on the ground. Allow your posture to relax, perhaps placing your hands in your lap, releasing tension in your neck and shoulders. Allow your breath to slow, breathing in and out, in and out. In and out. Letting go of whatever thoughts may have been coursing through your mind, letting the busyness drift away. As you feel centered, turn your awareness to this marvelous earth we all live in and on and with. Allow a particular place to arise in your awareness, a place from your memory, your experience. Allow a place to offer itself to you. Do not think of a place or chase after it, but let somewhere approach you. Several places may flip through your mind like a slideshow. Wait till one settles. It may be shy, so move gently, lest you startle it. This may be a place from your memory or from your present, a beloved place, or perhaps a wounded or wounding place. Wherever comes, welcome it. Stay there for a few moments. What does it feel like? What do you notice? What emotions may arise? Within this image, you may find your attention drawn to some particular small place, or an object, or a creature. Whatever comes. Who or what is waiting for you? Does it have anything to say? If it feels right, you might pick something up to bring back with you to this world, placing it gently in your soul pocket. Or perhaps simply bring the experience and the emotions. They are light and travel easily. When you are ready, make a gesture or words of thanks to the place and what you have received, and prepare to leave. Gently return to the present moment, to the place your body exists in now, and to this community. As you feel your soul return, return also into your body and rejoin this material world. And when you are ready, open your eyes to the beauty within and around you. So I said earlier that there are 4 C's that I wanted to speak about. The first is the congregation. the extraordinary breadth and width and depth of the beings, the creatures that have assembled here. The second is a time of contemplation. The third C is the community itself. And when we return at Church of the Woods after our 20 minutes in the woods, we have a time for everybody to speak, to share what they may have experienced, the gifts they might have received, the questions that might have arisen, the complaints that they might want to offer. That's the third C, is the community itself speaks. So what appears as a relatively brief homily by one person then becomes a shared experience where many have a voice. Everyone has an opportunity to speak. And we go for as long as we need to from that. Then when those come to their natural end, we move to prayers. And then finally to the fourth C, which is communion, the Eucharist, which is how we conclude the service. And in the Eucharist, in keeping with all the rest that we've done, the first piece of bread is offered back to the earth herself in thanks and in recognition of all these other creatures who have been present. And after that, when dogs are present, the dogs receive. Then when children are present, the children receive. And after that, but only after that, do the adult humans receive. And then we sing and the service closes. So in keeping with this pattern of the four C's, we have returned now from our contemplation, and we'll open this up to the community. And Sam, may I turn to you to guide us in whatever conversation may emerge from here?
Wonderful. Stephen, thank you for bringing us into that deep imaginal realm and taking us with you into the woods. And this may be a good time to break into some of our small groups, which we typically do, Steve, after some words from our guest, to have about 10 minutes in small groups to dialogue with what we've heard, what we've experienced so far, and then we can reconvene as a larger cohort for the rest of the program. Does that sound okay to you, Steve?
That sounds great. It's just what I would do.
Yeah, let's let the community speak. So our wonderful assistant Joy is here with us and hopefully can help us with the breakout rooms if she's there.
I'm here and I'll be glad to.
Thank you so much. So let's take about, I would say let's take about 12 minutes in breakout rooms. So we'll have until about 35 past the hour to dialogue and share what we have heard so far. So thank you again, Steve. We'll see you all in about 12 minutes or so.
Hi.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I was here in person with our contemplative ecology retreat here at Mepkin, and we had some wonderful conversation drawing on what Steve invited us into. But I'd be curious to hear from other groups, maybe if anybody has any reflections that came up that they'd like to share, or any questions that Steve might be able to dialogue with. Feel free to hit the raised hand function on the bottom of your Zoom screen. You could also type a thought or a question in the chat if you feel compelled. One reflection that came from our community was folks were speaking about how this approach to the Eucharist felt very non-hierarchical, and the idea of offering Eucharist to the land and to the dogs felt like this deep experience of reciprocity. And one person remarked that it almost recalled some indigenous practices of direct reciprocity with the earth. I know Robin Wall Kimmerer speaks about that in Braiding Sweetgrass, this idea of the honorable harvest. Steve, anything you want to say on that vein? I think you're muted.
There we go. Yes, just to say yes, it's exactly that. And one of the things I'm very careful about at Church of the Woods is to honor the fact that I was called into the Christian tradition, and to try and understand from within Christianity how to make these kinds of, create these kinds of understandings. So it is, so that's why we use this as the Eucharist. I mean, it's still very explicitly Eucharistic, but simply, I don't know how many of you in yesterday's gospel reading was the story from Mark where he encounters the Syrophoenician woman, and she instructs him. This is marvelous. She challenges him and teaches him that what he's doing is much bigger than he thought it was, and that it extends way beyond just the children of Israel, and has this wonderful, even the dogs under the table eat the crumbs, the children's crumbs. And so I preached on that yesterday. I said, that's what we are doing here. We're extending the teaching of the church well beyond what it understands, that nothing is refused the nourishment, the divine nourishment. Nothing is refused God's food. And so it's a very direct expression of that, just like Robin Wall Kimmerer, but from within the Christian tradition. So something trying to kind of reinterpret or expand, broaden, stretch the boundaries of the Christian tradition so that it encompasses all creation, and not just human beings, not just baptized Christians, not just this group or that group, not just human beings, but everything, everything, everything.
Well, thank you, Steve. I see in the chat, Martha had a question. I was wondering about grief. When people are filled with grief about the condition of the earth, how is that approached in Church of the Woods?
We make space for it, and it happens. I mean, certainly about the state of the earth, also, of course, about personal things. To create space for that requires creating a community of trust, so that people can feel free to bring those things in. That, of course, takes time. It takes tenderness. It takes compassion. But above all, it just takes listening. So what I sometimes tell people is that the first practice here, when we're in a circle like this where they're sharing, the essence of that practice is actually listening. One person speaks, but everybody is listening. And to listen with open heart, with whole heart, to whatever comes. And Alice, I can't see you. Alice had a similar question about what happens if what you encounter out in the woods is trash. Oh no, was it Debbie? I'm sorry, one of you. Yeah, there you are. And you know, instead of some beautiful flower, what if you find a piece of trash? We'll bring it back too, and that becomes part of the offering. We offer our trash to God, our personal trash and our collective ecological trash and whatever else. So in a sense, everything belongs. Again, try to create a space where it all can be received, held in this sacred space, and ultimately transformed by that giving and receiving. So that's a little bit of a wandering answer. I hope it's helpful.
Definitely. Thank you, Steve. I see Marjorie has a hand up. Marjorie, do you want to come off mute and share?
Sure. This really sounds dumb, but what do you do about cold or rainy weather? And do you follow the lectionary?
Yes, we follow the lectionary. We follow the lectionary pretty strictly with the gospel, but have some flexibility on the other elements of it. Usually follow the appointed psalm, but the Old Testament and epistle we can often substitute. So I'll bring in poetry, a variety of other things, but almost all, unless it's a very rare date when we don't use the gospel reading. So that's a pretty straightforward yes. The buildings or the cold and wet is a really good question, not dumb at all. For our first year, we met entirely outside. It was a very, very, very cold winter with a lot of snow. And that definitely affects how many people show up. The second year, we built a small building, a barn with a wood stove in it. It's uninsulated and very, very simple, but it does provide shelter. And I mean, yeah, our New Hampshire winters can be cold, and cold rain is the worst of all. So we do have indoor space. During COVID, we moved back outside. We kept going right through, but we moved back outside for 2 winters, I think, all the way. And so no matter what. In good weather, we had a much larger congregation because people came to us because we were still meeting. In bad weather, it shrunk again. And then we actually built a second building. This is a part of my own story I didn't tell, which is also heated by wood, but very tightly insulated. And the space you can see, that was the building was completed in the beginning of 2020, just before the pandemic. I actually live here kind of as a solitary forest dweller. Those of you who may know, in the Russian tradition of pustynia, this is my pustynia. So I live in this space in the woods, and there's a chapel behind me. You can't see it, but a beautiful little, very simple chapel that we also use. No matter what the weather is, we do our 20 minutes outside. And from roughly the beginning of April through October, we're outside all the time unless it's raining. In the winter, we begin and end indoors, but the middle is still outdoors. So we have made accommodation for weather, and it works pretty well. So yeah, good question. Thank you.
Diana and Gerard, you'd like to come off mute?
Thank you. Thank you. We're off mute, I gather. Steve, nice to meet you. I missed your introductory meditation by having a visitor rap on our door for the first time in about 12 years.
Wow. Well,
no, we're not quite as hermetic as or hermetic as you are, but we're sort of heading that way. We're in North Carolina, kind of up near the Virginia border. And as you know, beautiful country as well.
Yes.
I guess the liturgies, I had this question for, was it Beth? Was she? The other priest who did liturgies outdoors that came through. Victoria, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Victoria Lewis?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, a good friend.
Yeah, oh, good. Yeah, I couldn't get as much out of her about the nuts and bolts of the liturgy, like the materials.
Yeah.
For example, what about your materials such as Eucharist choices, wine, body and blood of Christ, chalices, feeding the dogs, feeding the other animals? How does that?
Yeah. Victoria does not come from a liturgical sacramental tradition. So she would not, it's not the part of the Christian tradition that she is from. I do. I mean, I come from, out of the Anglican tradition. So I can tell you a lot about those questions. And if anybody else wants to shut me up, please do. It took a while to figure out. Just kind of materially, I have a small plastic sled that I pull into the woods that has one box in it which holds psalters. I don't know how many of you might know the St. Helena Psalter. It's a beautiful blue version of the book, the Psalms in the Book of Common Prayer, but opened up into more expansive language. So we bring a box that has psalters in it, and a box that has a chalice, paten, bread, wine. We do use wine. So it's a very simple, kind of a sacristy in a sled. I wrote a Eucharistic prayer that embodies the kind of the spirituality, theology, and ecclesiology, that is the non-hierarchy of what we do. I wrote it derived from Eucharistic prayers in the Episcopal Church. But so anybody who knows some of those will recognize bits of it. So it very much follows the Eucharistic pattern, exactly follows the pattern, the patterns of the Eucharist in the Book of Common Prayer. And it took me several years to gain the poetic beauty of the best of the prayer book. But after a few years, I got it. I will say it's pretty good. I would be very happy to provide that through Sam in a PDF form. I'll say it's a pretty damn good liturgy. Everything except the Psalm and the Eucharistic prayer is done orally, without printed materials, unless we don't have hymnals. We do sometimes print song sheets, but a lot of our singing is done paperless. But we do, like yesterday, we had a couple of sheets of music that we wanted to pass out. Those just get passed out, handed out as single sheets, and then gathered back. So we try hard to keep paper to a minimum. So the only thing one really needs is the Eucharistic prayer, and that's printed on it's a little sheet of paper, about the size of a large number 10 envelope, a little bit smaller, just that folds open and closed. And we use the same liturgy every week. I'm glad you asked. These are important questions because the space changes every week. It's the inverse of an indoor church, where the space is largely the same every week and the liturgy changes, the bulletin changes. We're the other way around. The liturgy is identical every week. I mean, even Christmas and Easter. We'll sometimes add, like in Advent or Lent, we might add a particular, a different opening prayer. But aside from that, the liturgy is identical every week, but the space changes every week, and often and during the service, clouds come, birds come. So it's kind of turning that on its head. There's no need to change the liturgy. because so much else changes. And in fact, the liturgy provides the stability because it's the same liturgy. And the people who've come for a while, they don't need to look at paper except for the psalm. They still will use the Psalter, but they don't need to see the Eucharistic prayer because they know it. But it's yeah, it was a really good question. So we're a very liturgical, sacramental, liturgical and sacramental church. I mean, very kind of straight line, and in that way, very orthodox. In that way, very orthodox. I mean, I am an orthodox in that kind of sense, an orthodox believer, except really in the expanding of who's present and kind of what's going on with the congregation. But the rest of it, yeah. So really good questions.
Am I muted, or can I ask a very quick follow-up? Just a quick follow-up, and that's Sundays we have ritual too, and we all do it if we think about it. Sundays it might start off for us doing the readings, Catholic tradition, doing the readings for the day on Sunday, the three of them, and maybe going to church, maybe not, but usually going over for an 11 o'clock mass, which is indoors, sadly enough. But sometimes I'll read a Farmer's Almanac as sort of a morning kind of prayer. Do you mold those into anything you do? The seasons, the astronomy, anything like that?
If something captures my attention, I easily could. I don't do it as a standard practice, unless there's, I mean, if it's an eclipse, some big thing, or solstices. We're pretty cognizant of that, and the change of the seasons, of course, is a huge thing, and those are very pronounced, noticeable, and they shape everything. So that, in a sense, that's the water we swim in, and those are astronomical in origin.
Yeah. Thank you.
And a lot about the weather. We're always talking about the weather.
Thanks, Steve. We had a question here from one of our retreatants about how you use the Old Testament, particularly with the Song of Songs. If you could say a little bit more about,
Yeah, it's interesting. We have never focused, kind of really focused on the Song of Songs, but boy, we could have a whole season. It would actually be a really interesting thing to do, because it would take more than once. Be a really neat thing to do. We have not done it. Other parts of the Old Testament, we spend less with it, except for the Psalms. I go back to Genesis, the beginning of Genesis, a lot. No surprise with creation stories. What's going on there is really important. There are other bits and pieces that are real favorites. When the loggers who were here just before I acquired the land left, they left not only a lot of down trees and slash and logs, but a lot of broken machinery too. One piece that they left was this crumpled old aluminum ladder. Just as a pile of, I don't know why they had a ladder. I figured it must have been to climb up on one of the big machines or something. But anyway, it was so bent and broken. I mean, I've got pictures of it. I can't show them right now, but it was so bent and broken, I immediately recognized it as Jacob's ladder, because it was so evident that surely God has been in this place and we did not know it. And this ladder is so bent and broken that only an angel could possibly climb up and down it. It would not hold a human being. So I actually made up a little sign and hung it on the ladder right where we walk into the woods and said Jacob's ladder. So I have this on the highest authority. We have the one true ladder here as our relic. So it's really quite extraordinary. And it's aluminum, so it will be here for quite a long time. So anybody who wants to come and see the one true ladder, I would love to host you. So we play games like that.
Thank you, Steve. I'm seeing a few more contributions in the chat, and then I'd love to hear from Father Garrick. From Brian Hersey, how are you and the church sustained financially?
Oh gosh, same as everybody else. Through contributions. At the beginning, we had a couple of grants, one in particular from the Episcopal Diocese of New Hampshire that helped us get started. We've had a couple of other small grants, but the vast majority of it is contributions of members, members of the community and supporters. So, it's a shoestring operation like most.
Yeah.
It's a terrible way to get rich. A really bad way to get rich. So, yeah. No secrets, no magic. Sorry.
Yeah, I can imagine. So a few folks in the chat are asking for this liturgy you wrote. So hopefully we can make that available, Steve, if you're amenable to it.
Yeah, I will. If it's okay, I can send that to you, Sam, and then distribute that. Does that work? And what you'll see in it is that the everything up until the Eucharistic prayer, with the exception of the confession, which we call a prayer for restoration, that's written, but everything else before that is done orally. So it the leader of the service has to know the service and guides people through. The rubrics that would be in a regular bulletin or in the Book of Common Prayer are not present. So it puts more responsibility on the leader to do that orally. But it'll at least give you a flavor. And then there's the confession and the Eucharistic prayer, which is really all the bulletin is. I mean, that's the only part that we every week have printed. And again, we use the same one every week, so we don't have to reprint at all. So, but yeah, I'll send that to you. And
thank you. Yeah, I think this community would be very excited to see it.
Father, it's pretty cool. It works. It's a really good liturgy. It's just a really good liturgy. I believe in liturgy, as you can tell. I think liturgy really matters. So it's a good liturgy. It really works. It's just different.
Yeah. Father Garrick?
Yes, my question is, what are people saying about their experience of being part of the Church of the Woods now for a few years?
Yeah. They speak about the connection to the natural world and that as a gateway to God. They speak about the sense of everybody being included and having a voice that is in the service, anybody, and kids speak up just as readily as adults. They speak about the formation, and this is true of many places, of trust, where people can expose their fears, their insecurities, their worries. They speak, again, these are true of so many things. They speak about joy, they speak about love, they speak about belonging. They speak about expanding an understanding of God and of what it means to be a follower of Christ. Most of our congregation, I'd say it's probably 40% people who've come from a Catholic background, 40% from, or maybe 30, maybe it's a third people from a Catholic background, third from an Episcopal background, and a third from a variety of other Christian backgrounds. And initially, I thought it might be more people who are kind of spiritual but not religious, but it proved not to be what we were drawing. The people who are most comfortable here are people who value liturgical and sacramental worship, and the woods and the natural world, in the natural world. But they're definitely the Eucharist really matters to people.
So another question following up on that, what as this church grows, at what point do you lose the intimacy of the group, or having everybody to be able to share and set.
Yes, that's a really good question. This summer, for the first time, we've begun to test that experience. We've had groups, to my great surprise and delight, groups of 25 to 30, which is several times the size of our usual group in previous years. All of a sudden this summer, I don't know why. And it does affect that sharing. So we've only just started to experience it. Being outdoors and the vagaries and the challenges of that have so far, plus just the oddity of what we do, has prevented us from having to deal with that except occasionally. So it'll be interesting to see, but that's a problem I hope is still ahead of us. We might well do something like split into two groups briefly and then come back. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. We have found that anything over about 17, 18, 20 people, the quality of the sharing drops pretty quickly.
Thank you.
And we've rarely had more than that many adults. When we have larger numbers, it's because they're kids. So anyway, yeah. But it's may it become a problem.
Thank you, Steve. I'm also seeing a question in the chat from Sandra about, has it been easy to work with your bishop on this?
98% yes. My bishop, Rob Hirschfeld, was a supporter of this from the beginning. He told me, maybe last year, that there was more pushback against this than I had realized, and he sheltered me from that, which I'm very grateful for. So he has been a steady champion. That is not to say there haven't also been some times of conflict. There have been. But 98%, he's been enormously supportive, really enormously supportive. So yeah. Thank God. He was also the bishop who ordained me. So in some way, he knew what he was getting into. But so I give him double thanks for that. Yes, many bishops would not have been as keen about this.
Thank you for your candor, Steve. I'm curious to add to this conversation, Steve. I mean, you've been a forester and a conservationist for many years, and part of this forum is deepening our ecological spirituality and also finding a sense of hope and inspiration amidst so much ecological crisis. And I'm curious, like, how do you see the Church of the Woods and your work as galvanizing hope and engaged action? Like, how do you see this form of liturgy as, how can this support our movements to conserve endangered wilderness and to combat climate change?
Yeah, boy, those are good questions. I wish I had compelling answers. Another thing that's happened here. This is let me read a little note that I wrote to myself last week or the week before that's sitting right next to me. Because this is really the answer to your question. This is kind of a guidance to myself now. Just because it will take 1,000 years is no reason not to begin. I think this is a 1,000-year project of understanding again the earth as sacred space. It's not going to happen quickly. What we are doing, and this is the part of the work that I'm going to be spending the next 15 years kind of laboring on is more how to be understanding the earth as actually as the sacred space, the fundamental sacred space, because I think it's that kind of understanding that what we're doing has to offer, as opposed to how to respond to climate change right now or how to conserve land. This is a bigger, longer term project, which is actually one of the things the church is very good at, or the tradition, let me say it that way. The tradition is very good at holding things as long-term projects. So that's, in a sense, it's not a very satisfying answer, but it's the best answer that I've got. Is a long-term shift of awareness, of consciousness, of relationship with the earth that all Western civilization, and now indeed most global so-called civilization, has completely forgotten how to understand the earth as a sacred space. And who are we? Who are the people who teach that, who remind people of that? And we are one little tiny demonstration project where we have over a decade, over 12 years, so in some ways pretty quickly, established 100 acres of woods as the sacred space. And it's palpable. And walk here and it feels different from the land around, because people have been there in prayer week in and week out for a dozen years. I'm sure that's true. I've only been to Mepkin once. I have been there. But places where people have been in prayer for long periods of time change. Anybody who's been into spaces that have been prayed knows that. They change. That's the work. It's long, it's slow, but it's deep. So that's the piece of it that we are doing. And somebody had a note in there about weekly writing, weekly meditations. They stopped, but they will begin again around this topic, hopefully in October. Let me just say one more kind of just on that. Sam, you and I hadn't talked about this, but yesterday was actually my last Sunday at the Priest of Church of the Woods. So I retired from that and handed it over yesterday in order to begin this next work. Sort of to be thinking and writing of what does it mean to begin that 1,000-year work of thinking about understanding through ecological and Christian, the two languages that I really know, understandings of the world. So I will be writing. I will be writing about that, and yeah, soon. So, and I would love, maybe Sam, I can, once I get that set up, I'll be doing that through the platform Substack, and Sam, I could send that, and you could send that out to anybody who wants to follow it. It's not up and running yet, but it will be soon.
Please do. We would love to distribute access to your meditations among our community. And I also work with the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, as you know, Steve. So we'd love to feature the meditations in our newsletter and other places.
That'd be awesome. Thanks. Yep. This is my next project, which will get going in earnest in October.
Wonderful.
And I will remain. I'll be leaving Church of the Woods, leaving the community for 6 months, and then coming back in a new role by next March. But I will not come back as the leader of the community, but in a different role with this as the emphasis of my work.
Wonderful. Well, we're obviously wishing you well with this new chapter, Stephen. It feels very synchronistic to be, having this platform to share your work literally the day after you offer serve it. So grateful for this divine timing.
Yeah.
We had one other related question from our retreatants here at Metcalf, that have you seen an increased inclination to creation care activism within the core members of your church?
No. Um, those who came in with that as being their kind of their form of social action have continued it. But the bulk of the people who, and I don't know why this is true, but the bulk of them, of the kind of the really active members, come from healthcare, teaching, nursing, social work, kind of those kinds of backgrounds, and that's where their attention and energy continues to be directed. What has changed is their kind of just as we've been through, kind of their recognition and appreciation and understanding of the importance of relationship with the natural world. And they share that deeply, but it's not necessarily what their work is. That most of them work in kind of human helping roles in one way or another. Yeah, which is itself pretty interesting.
Totally. But I'm reminded of the words of Thomas Berry, where he said, we have a great work before us of moving modern industrial civilization from a period of destruction of the Earth's ecosystems to a period of mutually enhancing human Earth relations, the Ecozoic era. And, one of the things that he also wrote is that each of us has our great work, right? Some of us are nurses, some of us are teachers, some of us are environmental activists. So I think in that larger context, all those in social services, in education, in environmental activism, everybody is playing a vital role, right? It has a voice to play in this movement.
It's all part of the great work. Yeah. And the one thing, maybe I can throw this in as one final thought, is kind of it at a global level. What is the role of human beings is a question I reflect on a lot. What is our particular place? And I take very seriously the idea that human beings, that our deepest purpose here is to be the link between the heavens and the earth, between the divine and the mortal, and to hold that, to learn how to do that, no matter what our day-to-day work may be. We are the creatures on this planet who particularly have the capacity, because of our conscious, kind of the nature of our consciousness, to hold that space, that sacred space in between the divine realm and the mortal. So I think it's a really important time for us to say, what are human beings for? And that's what we're for, not just to use up and tear down the gifts of the earth, but to understand them as sacred. Big job.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for being a part of it, because you wouldn't be here if you weren't. You wouldn't be here if you weren't.
Absolutely. Any last questions or comments from the community?
Yes, I would like to say this to you, Steve. I think that the work you're doing is essential for the revitalization of the church, for the remaking of the church, for the world in which we live today. So I commend you, and my prayers go with you, and hopefully we might be able to do our little part here at Mepkin Abbey.
From the one time I visited, it must have been 15 years ago, it was evident. So thank you for that you have done, and again for all of you, because you wouldn't be here if you weren't doing a piece of it. So it's all, no matter what the piece is, they're all needed.
Absolutely. Well, deep gratitude to you, Steve, for your amazing work at Church of the Woods. And yeah, we're sending you our prayers and blessings for this next horizon in your life journey. And I know you are taking on a vital and important great work for the next 1,000 years and for future generations. And
yeah,
so
I'm there to see the end of
it. Yeah, well, please let us know how we can support your work, and please keep in touch with this community. We'd love to share some of the resources you mentioned in our follow-up communications. And for those of you who are interested in joining us next month, we're going to return on Monday, October 7th with Angela Mano, who has painted icons of endangered species, and which is on the cover of Elizabeth Johnson's latest book. She's a artist and a theologian and an activist who is deeply inspiring. So I hope you can join us on October 7th. But in the meantime, thank you again, Steve. Father Garrick, any parting words from you?
No, go in peace and continue the work.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.